My name is Erin Rowe, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Harvest Hope Food Bank. So many people in South Carolina struggle to put food on the table, and Harvest Hope can't meet our mission of a hunger-free South Carolina without great partners like Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. We thank you for your support, and I truly hope you enjoy your meal.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Brindy McNair with Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and I am here in the kitchen at the Tower with Elizabeth Inquo Johnson and Michaela Chambati, and they are members of our incredible community relations team. We're spread out in this massive kitchen to watch Chef Lawrence Wright teach us to make an amazing meal. And Chef Lawrence cooks for us here at Blue Cross Blue Shield, so I can tell you it's going to be delicious. Thank you so much to the 47 of you who signed up to participate in tonight's virtual cooking class that will benefit Harvest Hope Food Bank. Through your generosity, we're feeding our neighbors throughout the state. We'd also like to thank Nicole Rybar and Troy Davis for sharing their talent and expertise with us. They are making it possible for us to live stream this cooking class so that we can be together virtually. Also, we want to remind you to take notes of the prompts on the screen before each part of the meal. They'll help you follow along step by step. We'll also check in on you about halfway through to make sure that you've prepped all the foods you're supposed to have prepared by that point. And don't forget to stick around after the class for a drawing that includes a gift basket full of fabulous prizes, including a gift card to Hall's Chop House. So, let's get ready for a great night of delicious food with Chef Lawrence. Chef, are you ready?
We're ready.
All right, tie on your apron strings, set your oven to 350, and let's get cooking.
Thank you so much, Brittany. So again, I am Chef Lawrence Wright here at Blue Cross Blue Shield, South Carolina. We are here for Harvest Hope Food Bank. Thank you again to everyone for showing up and for your patience this evening. We should all be in here ready to go. Tonight we're going to kind of try to keep a very casual pace. We want this to be very much a class and not a tutorial, so we encourage participation. We see some of you are already active in the chat, and please continue to be active in the chat throughout the night. Brittany will be moderating for us throughout the evening, so if you want to post questions, she'll relay them to me, and she can answer them, I can answer them. So again, let's try to keep this pretty interactive. We're going to try a new style tonight, so for those of you that were with us for our first class, it may look a little bit different. And for those of you with us for your first time, we're really excited to have you here as well. What we're going to do is we're going to put up a slide on screen for each item as we move through the progression of the preparation of tonight's meal. That'll give you an idea of what you need to grab and the ingredients and equipment that you need to go ahead and pick up. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. You should see come up on your screen in just a moment a slide for your poached pears. Now we're going to start, I know it seems odd, start with the dessert, but we're going to start there, get that prepped, get it ready to go, and we'll finish at the end of class. So you'll see on your poached pears, you need to grab a medium-sized pot with a lid, a measuring cup, and a vegetable peeler. And we have a couple of different options with the melon baller, so you don't need to have one. I'm going to show you two different ways we can do these poached pears. All right, and we should all be back now. So you see we've got our pot, got our measuring cup, got our pears, and we've got our lemon. We also have our star anise and our vanilla bean. So we're going to start off by filling up our pot. And you'll notice that in the recipe, we're going to do about 4 cups of water. That's really kind of general. It doesn't have to be exactly that. It's going to depend really on the size of your pot. As you can see, the pot that I have here is fairly wide, so I may go a little bit heavier with my liquid. We just want to make sure we're getting those pears pretty well covered, so we'll adjust our liquid as we move forward. You'll also notice that in the recipe it says you have the option of going all water or half water, half wine. We're going to go half water, half wine here today. So I've just got a Chardonnay. We've got, again, roughly 2 cups of water. We're going to put in roughly 2 cups of the white wine. And we'll go ahead and set that over to about a medium, because we're going to want to simmer these, not boil these. We don't want to cook the pears. We're going to slowly poach them. They're going to be in this liquid for about 20 minutes, so we don't want it super, super hot. We're going to put it over, again, about a medium heat.
So, Chef Lawrence,
yes?
Pear variety matter?
It does, actually. So when you're poaching the pears, you're going to want to look for either Anjou or Basque pears. Those are your kind of firmer flesh pears. We're using an Anjou pear today. They're a little sweet, but they're just firm enough to hold up well to a poaching. All right, so I'm just going to peel this sticker off, and we'll get these peeled. And we'll show, again, a couple of different ways. Now, we're just going to kind of keep a little bucket here to put all of our scrap into. So we'll get this peeled down. And really, this is going to be up to personal preference on whether you want to leave these whole or cut them in half. If you're going to leave them whole, they're going to look really nice and fancy on your plate when you sit them up. But if you do leave them whole, what you're going to want to do is, after it's peeled, cut the bottom flat. That way it'll sit up nicely on the plate when you present it. And we'll get that last little bit of stuff off of there too.
So what other fruits can we poach?
Oh, and that's a great question for summertime, because we're seeing a lot of really great fruits come in right now. Really what you want to look for when you're poaching a fruit is something that's a firm fruit. So apples, but make sure you're sticking with like the Granny Smith apples, the firm flesh apples. Early season plums that are so nice and firm. Nectarines are really great. And then of course peaches. You know, South Carolina produces really great peaches. If you haven't been out to bee farms to get some peaches yet, make sure you get out there. Peaches are great to poach. All right, and we're going to peel this second one down, and I'll show you the other option we have for poaching these, and we'll go ahead and do both of them the same, one of each. That way you can see at the end that there's not a ton of difference in the end result. So once that's peeled, we'll still cut the bottom off, and then we'll cut it in half. And this is where you would use a melon baller. Now, you don't have to use a melon baller. A normal spoon will work just fine for this. But if you do have one, it works really well just to scoop out that seed pit. And you end up with a very nice, clean, finished pear. So we'll go ahead and put both of those into our simmering liquid.
Now, what are some other options we can use for simmering liquid?
So some of the different things you can do, and we'll bring this over so we can kind of watch this as we go, is instead of the sugar that we're going to use, if you are trying to reduce your granulated sugar, your refined sugars, you can use honey as a sweetener instead. In this recipe, we're going to be using star anise and vanilla bean, but you can also use clove. You can also use red wine in these. It makes a really gorgeous pear if you use a red wine in here. So there's some different options you can do. But this is kind of a very good start. It's a great, like, kind of hits all the flavors you want to hit when we do it in this method. All right, so we're going to go ahead and drop our 2 star anise in there. And you'll notice also on the recipe that it reads you can go anywhere from 1/4 cup to 1/2 cup of sugar. We're just going to go ahead with a full 1/2 cup because we're using that Chardonnay, and it kind of, we want to make sure that we are able to get through that the acid in that white wine. All right, now for those of you that have not used a vanilla bean before, there is a little bit of a trick to it. So probably something you've seen happen before. We're just going to split it right down the middle. Getting in there? There we go. And then using your knife, you'll scrape out, and you'll see all that vanilla meat comes out. So that's what we're going to look for, is that, and that we're going to get knocked into our pot. We'll get the rest of that from the other side. So we're just going to scrape that. So again, all that vanilla we're getting out of there. And then we're going to throw the whole pot in there as well. So this is our start on our poached pear. You see we've got our wine in there, our sugar, our vanilla, our star anise. And the last thing we're going to add is 1 strip of lemon peel. So we're going to peel a big strip off this lemon and just throw that in there. And that's all we really need. Just 1 good strip of that lemon peeled right off of it. All right, set that back over heat. And we're just going to let that sit there and poach for about 20 minutes, all right? You're going to see another slide come up now. We're going to wipe down our cutting board and move on to our next thing. The next thing we're going to start is our corn. So just grab the ingredients and the equipment listed on there, and we'll see you back in just a second. All right.
So Chef, it looks like we're cooking the corn in the husk.
We are cooking the corn in the husk. All right, so
Why?
welcome back, everybody. We are cooking the corn in the husk. So, a couple of reasons why we're doing that. One is we want to get that corn kind of started off. Now, you can just go cut straight off of the raw ear and just cut the corn off and then cook the whole thing in the pan. That's absolutely a good way to do it. I like to cook them in the husk because I think it kind of draws the sugar out a little bit better. Also, it helps to almost steam off all that silk. So instead of trying to fight all that silk now and like get all the little pieces out, when we put it in the oven and cook it in the oven, it's going to actually steam all that out and it'll come out beautifully, and you'll see that when we get to that point. So we're just going to take our corn, and you can go ahead and pop your corn into the oven. And while that is getting started, we'll go ahead and do a little bit more prep on a couple other items. So we'll get our tomatoes ready. Now, some of you may have 2 small tomatoes like this. Some of you may have 1 large tomato. Some of you may have a half of a very large tomato. So that's just kind of what happens when you work with heirlooms. They're not a consistent size. They're not, modified down to be grocery store perfect. They're gorgeous. They're great flavor. There's a lot more flavor, but there's going to be inconsistencies in size and color. So kind of base your recipe around that. If something calls for 2 tomatoes, but you're going to use heirlooms, kind of use a rough guide. So we're using, again, roughly 2 tomatoes, 2 normal-sized tomatoes. But again, you may have 1 large tomato or a half of a very large tomato in your box that you got today from us. All right, so we're going to show you a couple of different ways to work with these tomatoes today, too. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we're working with just the flesh of the tomatoes, because we want this to be sort of like a salad almost. Not a salsa. So if we're making a salsa, we want all that juice and all the seeds and everything in there. But for what we're doing today, we want to make sure we have just the flesh, because we want to have a good, hearty, robust bite and not with all the juice. So there's a couple ways we can do that. Should be able to do this with any of the tomatoes that you got. One way is we can take and almost just kind of trim out all the meat from the outside of the tomato. And you'll see we're left with just the flesh. And we didn't even worry about cutting the stem off, just because we're going to cut right around it. So we're left with just the flesh, and we'll kind of just knock the seeds and stuff out of there. This is the method that I prefer. I think it works best. It ends up with good firm flesh and gets all the unwanted pieces out. The other way you can do it, and it works just as well, but it does kind of bruise up the flesh a little bit, but it still gets you to the end result that you want to get to, is we can just take the top off and expose all that, and then give it a squeeze, and squeeze all those seeds and everything out of there. So you see we get kind of the same thing, but we've just kind of bruised the flesh a little bit. And that's fine that we're doing this, because we're going to cook this, so it's going to kind of cook down anyway and get a little bit bruised up. Now I'm going to keep the cup that we stored your tomatoes in, and we're going to cut all of our stuff and put it right into that and hold it for a little bit later. So we're going to make sure everyone can see. We're going to cut our tomatoes into julienne strips like this, and then we're going to rotate and cut into a dice. Now again, be advised that you don't have to necessarily keep up with me, because we are going to take slide breaks from time to time. So if you're a little bit behind on tomato cutting, totally fine. Don't feel pressured. All right, we're going to continue cutting down here. Got a couple of items to prep after this. We'll do the same thing with our red onion and then with our pancetta. And we're going to cut it all. So what we're doing when we're cutting, and this is something that we always talk about when we're making knife cuts, is we want to keep in mind the end product. What is the end going to look like? And part of that involves the cooking. So what I mean by that is you want everything to be roughly the same size. That way it cooks all at the same time. So if we ended up with large pieces of tomato, small pieces of onion, we'd end up with overcooked onion and undercooked tomato. So we're kind of keeping in our heads while we're cutting roughly the size of a corn kernel, maybe a little bit bigger because the corn is going to be cooked. But that's we kind of keep everything in that size area. That's also going to make sure that when you're eating it, everything is going to be on the spoon. You're going to get a spoonful of everything. When you take a bite, you're going to get the same bite of every component of the finished dish. All right, and that same thing again with the other tomato. Just going to cut it into planks and then into a dice. And here you can see the difference in the one that we shaved and then the one that we kind of squished. Again, it's not going to make a lot of difference here because we're going to cook it down, so it's going to end up all kind of the same consistency anyway. But if you're doing like a pico de gallo or something, and you wanted to have a nice firm, peeling it like that is going to be the best way to go. All right, we're just going to kind of load all this back into our container and continue cutting the rest of the tomato that we have here, because we do want to use every piece.
How do you pick a good heirloom tomato?
So tomatoes for me it's almost counterintuitive. You think that you want to go and get like a nice firm, nice hard tomato that you can slice well. Those are usually the least amount of flavor. A good soft tomato is really going to have a lot more flavor to it. That means the sugars have developed in it. That means it's been allowed to ripen on the vine. It wasn't pulled green and then transported on a truck, thousands of miles. So, yeah, I look for a kind of a softer tomato. You still want good color. It still needs to be a pretty vibrant color. Even some of these really dark flesh ones like this one, it's still a great color. So, you don't want anything that's washed out. You don't want anything that's pink. You want good vibrant colors in your tomatoes. All right, so then for that core also, we're still going to do the same thing. We're just going to cut into these planks and then into the julienne strips and then into a dice. Also, I know I didn't mention it, but if you own a bench scraper or pastry knife, as they're sometimes called, it's a really, really great tool to have for prep. You can see how it just picks everything up off the cutting board and makes it nice and clean. One of my favorite tools, something I grab for everything I do. All right, we'll go into our onion now. All right, and everyone should have about a half an onion. Again, we're going to keep that container to prep everything into. We'll just kind of set these tomatoes to the side for now. We'll get back to those at the end. All right, and then our tomato, or rather our onion, I'm sorry. We're going to kind of follow along, the lines of the onion go all the way around like that. So we're going to follow that around. And you don't want to go all the way through to the back of the onion. You'll notice that I'm not cutting all the way to the back. What that does is it lets everything stay together, so it's just easier to work with. If you went all the way through, they'd be kind of falling all over the place. So we don't cut all the way through to the end of the onion. Turn it, and then we're going to cut that into a dice. Again, kind of keep it in mind, roughly that corn kernel size. And once we get to that end where it's still held together, we'll just cut it across and then just kind of rough chop it across. All right, and that's our onion done. Again, don't feel like you need to be where I am necessarily in your prep. We're going to take another slide break in just a moment, and you can catch up on this part before we move into the next section. The last thing we're going to prep for our corn is going to be our pancetta. And this is just a good thick cut pancetta. Again, using that same container for prep. And we're going to do, once again, just kind of keeping the idea of the corn kernel size in mind, which is about a medium dice.
So chef,
yes.
Let's say someone is monitoring a chat for a live cooking show right now and wants to recreate this meal later. What would be a good substitute for pancetta?
All right, so pancetta it's essentially a bacon. It's just a cured pork product. So if you don't want to go and make a special trip for pancetta or try to find a specialty store that carries it, though I think probably Publix and some of the other better grocery stores do carry it, you can absolutely use bacon in this. Bacon will be a great substitute and a great replacement for pancetta. All right, so that's all going to go into our prep cup. And we are now prepped on our corn. Again, your corn should be in the oven right now, and all of our items have been prepped, and we are ready to move into our next slide. So you should see a slide come up now for the Farro. And while you're grabbing all those things, I'll grab all my equipment as well with you.
And as a reminder, don't feel pressure if you can't keep pace with Chef Lawrence. He's a professional. And we'll be doing a check-in at the midpoint just to make sure that you have everything prepped that you're supposed to have prepared.
All right, welcome back everyone. You should have your medium-sized pot. Again, this is probably larger than most of your pots, but this is medium for us in an industrial kitchen. Your Farro, your green onions, a spoon, a colander. We have a couple of different ways we'll show you with the colander. You don't necessarily need to use it right now. We will need it later to drain our Farro, but I like to rinse mine right in the pot, so we'll show you how to do that, how I do that. And we'll go ahead and get with that. All right, so we'll go ahead and throw our Farro in. And again, if you want to kind of rinse your Farro in a colander, that's totally fine. Probably a lot easier to do it that way. I like to rinse mine the same way I rinse my rice, where I'll do it right in the pot. That way I can agitate it and really get all that extra starch out of there. So we'll do about 3 rinses. So I'm just gonna get in there right in my hand, shake it up, get it really agitated, knock all that extra starch off of there, and then just drain it off. And we'll do that a couple more times.
So Chef, why do we rinse things like Farro and rice? Why are we doing that?
So that extra starch in there, it is starch. So, you use starch to thicken things. And if we left all that extra starch in there, we end up with really gummy Farro because all that starch would just kind of mix in with that water and create like a paste almost. So we want to knock that off. That way we have nice individual grains of Farro and not a gummy liquid surrounding it all. All right, we'll do one more good rinse. And we're going to want to rinse this until it runs pretty clear. All right, so here's where we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit with our Farro. Up to this point, we've kind of treated it like a rice, but at this point, we're going to kind of switch and treat it almost like a pasta. So we're going to put about 4 cups of water in, and the reason I say we're going to move to like a pasta style is because we're going to not cook this like rice where we're just going to let it steam until all the water's evaporated. We're just going to cook it till it's done and then drain the water off. So we'll go ahead and put our roughly 4 cups of water in, and we'll do a little pinch of salt. And this should take about 20 minutes or so. And that's because this is a pearled Farro that we're using. So again, we're just gonna do a little pinch of salt. Doesn't need much because we'll re-season again when we finish. This is a pearled Farro. So you'll see there are 3 different variations on Farro that you'll find in the grocery store. You'll find a pearled, a semi-pearled, or a whole grain. So that's where, again, the rice comparison kind of comes back into play. Pearled is effectively the Farro version of a white rice. It's where the entire outer husk has been stripped, so you have just the inner germ of it. Whereas whole would be like brown rice, where it's the whole grain. Where Farro is different is there is a midpoint between the two, between the stripped and the whole grain. It's called semi-pearled. So those are also going to denote your cooking times. Just like with white rice versus brown rice, where you're at roughly 20 minutes versus roughly 45 minutes. With your pearled, it should take us about 20 minutes. Semi-pearled can take 35 to 40, and whole grain can take up to 60 minutes. So be aware of what kind of Farro that you've purchased when you purchase to know your cooking time. All right, we're just gonna set this again over a medium heat. Well, a medium-high heat rather, because we want to bring it to the boil, then reduce back down to the simmer. All right, we'll go ahead and check on our pears also. So the way we'll know when our pears are done is when they can be easily pierced with a knife. So it's been roughly 20 minutes on our pears. We'll give it a little poke, see if we can get in there. And you can see that I'm going in there very easily, so I'll know that those are done. Yep. Now we're gonna leave these pears in the poaching liquid, let them cool in there. Just on the countertop is fine. They don't necessarily need to go in the refrigerator. It'll be a little bit faster in the fridge, sure, but you can just let them cool on the countertop because by the time we come back to them, they should be cool enough to handle. So we're gonna set those to the side. Go ahead and pull your pears if they're pierced easily. All right, the last thing we're gonna do for our prep for our farros, we're gonna cut our green onions. And again, we're gonna use the container that we packaged as our prep container, kind of our mise en place container. So we'll just do a rough chop on these, almost a dice, and then back into there. I say the bench scraper helps, but sometimes it gets away from me. All right, and that's all we have to do for our farro until we get to the end. You'll see another slide come up now. This is going to be kind of our checkpoint, so we'll kind of talk through some things and let everyone make sure they come together. So at this point, we should have our pears have been pulled. Our corn should be in the oven. We're going to let that corn cook about 20 minutes, so we got about 15 minutes left on that. We got a couple of things we're going to knock out before we get there. The farro should be rinsed and on the stove, coming up to the boil, and then all of our prep should be done. So we'll give you guys a couple of minutes while we grab our next things to get to that point with us and maybe just talk a little bit. If anyone has anything to say in chat, please post any comments, questions, concerns in there, and Brittany or I will answer your questions and happy to talk to you.
And now is the perfect time to get caught up on any of the steps that you may have fallen behind on. Again, don't worry about matching Chef Lawrence's pace. And we did have a question in chat as to whether you could use a Mia farro. I thought that deserved to be asked.
Well, I think the extra W precludes her from the conversation. So
Okay.
There is no W in the farro we're using.
There is no W on the farro that we're using. So now is a great time to get caught up, take a breath, and we really just wanted to thank everyone again for supporting the Feeding Our Neighbors campaign. The virtual food drive for Harvest Hope Food Bank continues through July 30th. You can make your contribution through the link under the communique section of My eWork. And one of the best parts is you can designate which food bank you want to support through that link. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina has been supporting Harvest Hope since 1999, and employees have helped raise more than 600,000 meals for people in need throughout our state. So, unless there are any other questions. Oh, we have a couple of questions. Chef?
Yes?
Should the pot with the farro be covered with a lid?
Yes, you cover with a lid to get it to the boil. That'll just help bring it to the boil faster. But it doesn't need to be covered beyond that. I like to start it there just to help get it to the boil a little bit faster.
Okay. So if there are no other questions, go ahead and check your farro. Be sure it's not sticking to the bottom of the pot. And thank you again for supporting Harvest Hope Food Bank.
Okay, you should see another slide come up now that reads Gremolata. We're going to put together a Gremolata now. This is just going to be our finishing condiment for our proteins. Now this will work with either protein, okay? It's traditionally used as a topping for like a stewed veal, so like a veal ossobuco or something, but it works really well with both these applications, I think. We're going to do a couple of different plays with it, talk about a couple of different variations on that as well. All right, so you should now have your parsley, your garlic, and then a small bowl. So we're going to take our parsley, and with the parsley, we're going to pull off all the leaves. Now, if there's some small stems that get in there, that's going to be totally fine. We're just trying to avoid any of the really large woody stems. Anything that looks like this, those big stems like that, we don't want any of that in there because those are really not pleasant to eat. Even though we are going to chop this up pretty finely, we're going to want to try to avoid that. But if you end up with some of these stems in there, anything like this, that's going to be fine because those are going to be young and tender enough to where they're not going to interfere with our end result. So we're just going to pick through our parsley. And you'll notice that I'm keeping like a kind of a bowl of all my food scraps. This is something else that I really like to do. It's something that Blue Cross, all of our cafeterias in the Columbia area, we actually compost all of our food waste. All of our food waste goes to Atlas Organics, and they process it into whatever they do with it, that one goes here. So this will actually all go into a composting program, not into a trash can. For any of you that compost at home, you're probably already doing this anyway. But for those of you who don't, another reason I like to do this when I'm cooking at home is when I finish the night, I don't like to throw food waste into my home trash can because it's 2 or 3 days before I empty the trash usually, and I don't like to have a whole lot of food in my trash can in my house. So I'll actually bag this up into like a grocery bag and then take it straight outside. Either to, I do have a small compost heap, or out straight to the trash can. It just helps your kitchen smell a little bit better too. All right, so now we've got our parsley. We're just gonna kind of rock through this. And there's no real technique involved here other than just kind of going back and forth through it. If you hold down the point of your knife, and what you want to do, just make sure that you kind of flip over, because as you cut through this, cut down into this, you're going to push all the little pieces down. So we just want to make sure we kind of grab those pieces, put them back on top, and we're just going to flip it over a few times. Now, a chef that I worked with many years ago once told me that if you see green on your cutting board, you've cut the parsley too much. And that's kind of a good barometer for this. Now, of course, you're going to see a little bit of the green streaks. That's fine. But when you start completely dyeing it, that means you've shoved all the good juice out of that parsley. So we don't want to quite puree this. We're not making a pesto necessarily here. We still want it to be nice and fresh, nice and vibrant, and have a nice crisp to it when we bite it. If we were making a pesto or something, it'd be fine to kind of go at it until it was a paste. Because that would be the texture we're looking for, but we want this to still taste like summer. This is a summer repast, yes?
So, Chef.
Yes.
Let's say some of us don't trust ourselves that much with a knife.
Yes.
Could we use a food processor?
You absolutely can, yeah. If you just kind of pull all this off, go into a blender or food processor and pulse it a couple of times until you get, again, roughly this consistency, it'll work perfectly. I just like doing it by hand because I feel like I have a little more control, but it definitely saves time and can definitely be done in a food processor. All right, so then with our garlic, we have 3 different options on the garlic. One is you can use your box grater and take your garlic clove and run it down the small side of the box grater, and then we'll chop it up a little bit afterwards. But I find when I do that, it comes out great, but then I have to kind of dig in there to get all the garlic out. Works fine, it's an extra little step when you have to kind of dig into there. Another option you have is to use a zester, and we'll just kind of zest this like we would anything else that we would zest, like nutmeg or citrus. This works really well. This is a really great method. You'll see you'll get all that nice minced garlic in there, and just kind of pop that out. The last method we have is the knife method. And this is, again, my preferred method just because I feel like I have more control over what's going on. So we will just kind of crush this, just like you've seen happen a number of times. Everyone's seen the crushing the garlic with the knife. But what we're going to add to that is another little step. So once we get this kind of minced up a little bit, what we're going to do is we're going to use the flat of our knife to make a paste out of it. Now, if we were using this as a seasoning in a marinade or something, it would be fine to leave it chunky like this. But because we're using this as a condiment, even if you love garlic, and I think we all pretty well have a good, healthy love of garlic, you don't want to necessarily bite into a chunk of garlic. Even if it's a small chunk, you don't necessarily want to bite into that. So what we want is a paste. That way we get a nice even flavor throughout everything. So we're going to take this side of our knife and just going to kind of squish it down as you go through it. And once we get this, and you can see it's going to start to release a lot of that really great garlic juice in there. And once we get a couple of passes through with this, we're going to add a little bit of salt to it. And what that salt is going to do is it's going to act like just like a coarse element that's going to help to grind all that out. So it's like putting it into a mortar and pestle, basically. And you'll see on your cutting boards, probably lots of garlic juice, and you'll see it comes together really, really nicely. And we're just going to keep working this back and forth until we get all those chunks shaved down into a paste and we have a nice, consistent paste. Just a couple more passes. Now this you could also put in the food processor with a little bit of oil and process it down to a paste, and that would work just fine as well. Just be careful that if you're going to do that, that you consume it pretty well immediately, because you do not want to store garlic in oil. Garlic actually can develop toxins if it's stored in non-oxygen. So if you put like raw garlic into oil, it can actually make you pretty sick. So be careful with that. But of course, it's like days later. So if you're going to do garlic in oil, like with this Gremolata, make sure you consume it today or tomorrow. Don't let it sit very long, okay? Because we are putting raw garlic into oil. Didn't mean to get all doomsday on everybody, so I apologize for that. But it's a really good thing to know, because I don't think that a lot of people are aware of that garlic can develop toxins if it's in a non-oxygen environment like oil. All right, so we have a nice paste here. So I'm going to take that, add that into our parsley. And we've already got a little salt in that garlic, so we won't need to add any more salt to it right now. But what we will add is the zest of our lemon. So this is, again, where we would use our zester, or you can use the box grater for this as well. So we're using that same lemon that we peeled before, just getting all of this zest off. Again, we're being careful not to cut too far down into the pith. You really want just the yellow. You catch a little bit of white, it's not going to hurt anything, but you just want to try to avoid as much of the white as you can. All right, bring that down into there. Don't forget to kind of check your Farro from time to time. I'm going to give mine a quick stir. And it's doing fine back there. Now, you can stay right here with the Gremolata, and this is kind of really the traditional way that you would see Gremolata served, is just like this. But to make it more of a condiment and make it more like almost like a sauce, we're going to throw a little bit of oil in. Again, it's not necessary to at this point, because you can see as that garlic and the salt all starts to draw the moisture out of the parsley, it'll really kind of come together as a condiment on its own and not just a pile of chopped parsley. But we will add a little bit of oil. So you can kind of put as much or as little as you want in. We're just going to go with a little bit to start. And this is going to be very much a personal preference on this. So I think that's all we need. That was about a half an ounce. Just enough to where it's all nicely coated. And that Gremolata is done. We can put that to the side, and we are finished with our Gremolata. All right, we are ready to move to our proteins. And then we're going to finish up everything else, and we'll be done for the night. So we are in the home stretch, guys. We are very close. Again, we're going to take just a couple of minutes while this slide is up, just so that everyone can kind of make sure they catch up, pour another glass of wine, whatever you're doing at home. Go ahead and grab your protein if you chose the pork or the scallops. Get them out of their packaging and onto a paper towel lined plate or sheet, and we'll be right back with you.
Again, now is a great time to get caught up on any of those steps that you have missed. Check your Farro, give it a stir, make sure it's not sticking to the bottom. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat. We'll be tossing questions to Chef Lawrence throughout.
Took all these towels. That. All right, welcome back, everybody. You can see that we've got our proteins here. We're doing both of them so that we can, so that whatever you chose, we can go through it with you. So for the scallops, we're going to drain those off. There should be some good amount of moisture in there, even though these are a dry pack scallop. Now is a good time to maybe talk about the difference between a dry pack versus a wet pack scallop. So these are a dry pack scallop. And essentially what that means is that they came out of the ocean, they were harvested, and they were packaged. Nothing else was done to them. Now if you get a wet pack scallop, what that means is they've taken that scallop and they've brined it and filled it with a saltwater solution. So you're paying for water and salt. You're getting a water and salt filled scallop. There's nothing wrong with them, you're just paying for stuff that you're not really eating. Dry pack scallops are a superior product. They're gonna be more expensive though because they're harder to maintain, they don't last as long, they have a lower shelf life, but they're gonna give you a truer scallop flavor. So we absolutely went with our dry pack scallops today. So those of you that did get the scallops, you'll notice that on each one of these, if you haven't ever worked with scallops before, there's a little it's actually the piece that holds this mussel into the shell. You're gonna wanna pull that off. Now you don't have to, so if you don't wanna mess with it, it's totally fine. You can eat these, and in fact we do eat these, but it's not something that you wanna have as part of your plate. And by say we eat these, I mean the chefs at the kitchen eat them while we're making our scallops for other people. So we're gonna pull all those off. And again, we're gonna make sure that we're trying to get as much of this liquid off of these as we can. So we're gonna pat them really, really dry so that we can get a good sear on them. For those of you with a pork chop, we'll get to you in just a second, but all you have to do is cut them out of the package and we'll keep on moving on. Checking Farro. All right. So again, make sure you're checking your Farro. Looks like my Farro is done. It's actually consumed, it's actually taken on all the water. So 4 cups was a great amount for us to have on this. If you do have a little bit of extra water, that's fine. Just kind of taste it. Make sure it tastes like you think it should taste. It should be tender. It shouldn't be mushy at all. It should be just nice and tender and ready to go. All right, so we're gonna set that to the side because we'll do some more with that later. Actually, we'll go ahead and drain that off into a colander. That way we can use this pot to finish the Farro with. All right, so we drained that off. We're just gonna let that sit for a minute. All right, and then for the pork chops, we're just gonna pull these out of the packaging. And same thing, we're just gonna get these patted dry on paper towels.
And Chef, you mentioned it before, but why do we pat our proteins dry?
Right, yeah, so we wanna make sure they're nice and dry so we can get a good sear on them. If they're wet, they're really just gonna kind of steam up. We're not gonna get that crust that we're looking for. We wanna have a GBD, right, the Golden Brown Delicious. We're looking for that crust. So the drier they are, the better chance you'll have of getting that. All right, so as to not cross-contaminate anything, I'm gonna go ahead and wash my hands real quick now that we've got those proteins out. This should be the only time we touch a raw protein. We're gonna use tongs from here on out, so we're good to go from here. Just that one hand wash and we're ready to move on. Now you'll notice that these pork chops are pretty thick, so we're gonna season them pretty liberally. Take, again, paper towels on the other side. We're gonna start our pork chops now. So for the pork chop people, we're gonna go ahead and get ready. For the scallop people, we're gonna do those a little bit later because they're only gonna take about 1.5 minutes per side, so we don't wanna start our scallops quite yet. All right, I think we got that pretty patted down.
So scallop folks, this is a great time to get caught up on any steps that you may have fallen behind on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And pork chop people, you'll have a minute once we get to the scallops while the pork chops are resting to have your time to catch up if you're a little bit behind where we are. All right, so we're just gonna take a little butter. About that much. We want a good amount of butter. They say the secret to restaurant food, the why your food doesn't taste like restaurant food is the butter. That's 100% the truth. So butter, don't be shy with it. It's okay. Throw the butter in there. We're having a good time tonight. We're not eating healthy tonight. Go ahead and throw the butter in. All right, we're gonna set that over a medium heat. We're gonna let that butter kind of foam up and then calm down. While it's in there, we're gonna throw our rosemary in. And once that gets to once the foam kind of subsides a little bit, we'll add our pork chops in there. And then we'll move on to finishing up our corn, finishing up our Farro, cooking our scallops, and then finishing our dessert. So again, we are close. We are almost there. Thank you guys for sticking with us. Thanks again for being here. Really happy to have you. Hope everyone's having a good time. Hope we're not moving too fast, not moving too slow, all those things. All right, while we're waiting on that, if your farro is already done and it's been pulled out and drained, you can add a little bit of butter, and I'm just going to leave my colander right on top. We're going to add a little bit of butter. Again, I say a little bit, that's kind of relative right now. And we're just going to brown this off in this pot, and we're going to retoss our farro in the browned butter. Now we want to brown this butter because we're working with this good whole grain. It's a really hearty grain, so we want to have a nice browned flavor with our butter. That's really going to pair well with the farro itself. So again, we're going to set that over about a medium heat and just let that go for a minute or two. All right, you can see our pork chop pan is ready. So we've got that foam. It's starting to subside a little bit, starting to change color just a bit. So we'll make sure we get our seasoned side down first. Throw our pork chops into our pan. Now this will work with a skillet as well. I like skillets a lot, but these pans just seem to be really versatile for something like this because we're going to kind of lift it up and baste as we go. So I like a lighter pan for this. It also helps to transfer that heat a little better. Put that back on. We're just going to kind of let that sit for a couple minutes, start to develop that crust, and we'll check it in just about 2 or 3 minutes to flip them over, and we'll start basting them. All right, so scallops we'll put to the side for a moment. All right, so that's the brown butter that we're looking for our farro. So to that, we'll go ahead and toss our farro in. Give that a stir, let it all get coated, and then throw in our green onion. And that's our farro done. We're just going to let that sit, let that butter marinate into that farro while we finish up the last of our prep. So we're not going to put this back on heat. We're just going to let that sit. And if we need to give it just a little bit of heat before service, it's fine, but we're just going to let that sit. There should be plenty of residual heat in there to keep that warm for dinner. All right, so we're going to go grab our corn. So for the corn, we're going to grab the 2 bowls. Now you don't have to use this 2-bowl method, but it's something that works really well, and I'll show you how that works in just a second once I grab my corn. Okay, here we have our corn, fresh out of the oven. So again, that was about 20 to 25 minutes. Corn is very forgiving. If we go 5 minutes one way or the other, it's totally gonna be fine because we are gonna cook it more in a pan. So it's not a problem at all if it goes a little bit long or a little bit short. It's gonna be pretty warm, so if you need to let it kind of sit and rest for a minute, that's fine. I don't know that I have much feeling left in my hand, so I'm just gonna peel it down. But you can see that all that silk, like we talked about, just comes right off. You know, there's almost nothing left there. It comes out so nice, and if you tried to do that when it was raw, you'd just be kind of fighting all those silk strands trying to pull them out. But if you just pinch it, pull it apart in half, it comes out very clean. Now if you kind of grab the stalk end, you don't have to worry about grabbing anything hot. So and again, that's why we like to do it in the husk, because it comes out absolutely clean, absolutely perfect, absolutely ready to go.
So Chef, why are we roasting it in the oven as opposed to cooking the corn some other way?
So yeah, that's one of the reasons why is to get that silk steamed off of there. Another reason is, even though it is height of summer right now and the corn is really nice and sweet, I find if I just keep my cooking methods consistent, it helps me out. But if you're buying corn in the winter and you want to cook it, if you cook it straight off the cob, sometimes it's really starchy and not very sweet. But if you cook it in the oven, nice and slow like that to get it started, it'll really draw that sugar out and help to sweeten up the corn some. All right, so we're gonna pork chop people. We're back to you for a second. This is the part of the night where we're gonna start doing like 5 and 6 different things. So again, don't feel you need to necessarily keep up with where we are. So you can see we've got that nice crust there started. What you're going to do is you're going to grab a spoon, And then every couple of minutes, you're going to just pull that butter up and baste that pork. That's why we have that rosemary in there, because we're going to perfume that butter with the rosemary. And again, we're getting this nice brown butter, basting this pork chop. All right, and again, I know we're bouncing back and forth, so it's just how we're going to do for the rest. We only have 2 or 3 more things, so we're almost there. So what we do with the 2 bowls is we're going to take one small bowl, invert it into a larger bowl. Stand your corn up. Now when you're cutting these kernels off, try not to dig too deep into the ear itself because you don't want that really fibrous material. So you want to go kind of shallow, shallower than you think you need to, because you really just want the meat of the corn. And you can see, I don't know if any of you all have, I assume most of you all have cut kernels off of an ear of corn. You'll know that if you do this just right on your cutting board, you end up with corn kernels all over the table. So this just really kind of keeps everything in one place, keeps everything together. Now what we're going to do too is once we've got all the corn, we're going to take the back of our knife and shove down. This is called the corn milk. So we're going to get all that out of there. That's just really great concentrated corn flavor that we're pulling all that out. It's almost like a corn stock, S-T-O-C-K, not S-T-A-L-K. So you can see that what we're getting there is this really just concentrated corn flavor. And because that's nice and starchy, when we finish our dish, all that starch in there that we talked about, the starch that we wanted to avoid with Farro by making things too thick, the starch in there is going to take all the oil, all the tomato juices, and all the excess liquid and make a really great, almost like a cream corn consistency. So we'll do that with the other one. Again, not cutting too deep because we don't want to bite into any of those fibers. It's the same thing like with the parsley. We don't want to bite into a thick parsley stem. You don't want to bite into that fibrous end of the corn. So once that's there, again, we're going to scrape down all that corn milk. All right, we just got a couple more things to do to finish up with our corn. So once we've got that, just take your extra bowl out of the center and you're left with just the corn that you want. So we've got that. All right, pork chop folks, remember to keep basting your pork. Now what we're looking for on this is about 145, 150 degrees. Now, if you're not comfortable with a pink pork, that's totally fine. If you want to go all the way fully well done, you're going to be shooting for about 165, and you can finish that either in the pan, or you can transfer it to a baking sheet and go into the oven to finish it off. But we're actually really close to being done on this pork for the 145. Give it just another minute while we finish up our corn. So we're going to take another pan for the corn. We're going to set it over medium heat. We're going to start with the pancetta that we had prepped. That's going to go into our pan. Once that cooks a little bit, now that's going to stick a little bit, but it's totally fine. We'll show you what to do with that. You actually kind of are looking for a little bit of that to stick. It's going to be totally okay. It's going to take just a minute to get there. Meantime, kind of wipe up a little bit.
So Chef, why do we start with the pancetta in the pan?
So we start with the pancetta because we want to get a sear on that. So if we added everything in together, we would end up with onions that are a little bit raw, tomatoes that are a little bit overcooked, and pancetta that's really kind of gummy and chewy. So we're going to start this off just the pancetta so we can get it a good crisp on it. That way it's fully cooked and ready to go, and then we'll add in the other ingredients on top of it. All right, pork chop folks, I think we are probably ready to go on this one. So that's about, without grabbing a thermometer, we should be right around the 145 degree mark. Now we're going to let that sit and rest until everything else is done. A typical kind of good rule of thumb when cooking thick proteins, pork, steaks, especially steaks, is to let them rest for about half the time you cook them. So we cook this roughly 10 minutes or so, so we're going to give it a minimum of a 5-minute rest. That way all those juices can get reabsorbed into the protein. If you go ahead and cut now, you're just gonna let all that juice out. You want it to reabsorb. So we're gonna put that to the side, let it rest. All right, so with our pancetta, you can see we're getting a little bit of that brown on the bottom of the pan. So we're starting to get a little bit of color. What we're gonna look for, again, is just kind of like a cooked bacon color is what we're looking for effectively. So we'll give that a couple more minutes to get all the sides nicely brown, and we'll finish up with that in just a moment. But now we're ready for scallop folks. So scallop folks, it's your turn. So pork people, remember your pork is all rested, so you can kind of take a break here and catch up. Scallop folks, we're gonna start with you now. So we're gonna start with butter. Now, the difference here is instead of just going crazy with the butter, we're actually gonna be a little judicious this time. The reason is we don't want a whole lot of extra liquid in the pan because those scallops, even though we did pat them dry, they're still gonna release a lot of liquid. They're still holding on to a lot of seawater. Even dry packed, they are still a very liquidy protein. So we're gonna put a little bit of butter in and then just about a half an ounce of oil. Again, not much. Now the reason we're gonna mix these two is oil has a higher smoke point than butter. So when we mix the two together, we get the benefits of both. We get the higher smoke point of the oil, which means we can cook a little bit higher, a little bit hotter, get a better crisp, and we get the flavor of the butter. So we're kind of having the two meet in the middle. So we're gonna put those in there. And same thing we did with the pork, we're gonna let that foam up and then kind of come back down. And that's when we'll add in our scallops. So scallops, again, we're gonna season them nicely with salt and pepper. And we're gonna cook them really the same way we did the pork chops. The only difference is we're gonna cook them for a much shorter time. All right, so our pancetta, we're waiting on our pan for our scallops to heat up. You can see it's nicely brown throughout. And you see a lot of this stuff in the bottom and you're like, oh no, it's gonna be all, I'm gonna have to clean that in the night. Well, no. You put your tomatoes in, give it a toss, and you see all that juice from those tomatoes has cleaned your pan. So that's called deglazing the pan. So it's when you use a liquid to pull up the fond, which is the brown sticky bits there. So we'll throw that in there, throw our onions in there, and we're gonna give these just a few minutes. Now I know in the recipe it says to add the onions before adding the tomatoes, and that's fine to do it that way, but we're gonna kind of modify it. If you did your onions first, it's totally fine. It just means you're gonna cook your onions down a little bit more, but because we're gonna do a couple other things, I went ahead and added them same time. That way we can kind of have everything come together at once. Either way is gonna work, especially in this application. So if we have a little bit more bite to our onion, it's gonna be fine because we're gonna have a little bit of a bite to our corn. So after that cooks for a minute, we're gonna add our corn in. So you can see our foam has subsided just like it did before. So we're gonna add our scallops in. And these are only gonna take about a minute per side, a minute and a half at most. Again, we should be over about a medium to a medium-high heat.
So Chef, how can you tell when a scallop is ready to be flipped and when it's done?
When it has color. Scallops, you really don't want to overcook them. You can eat them completely raw, but we want to make sure that we're just getting a sear on it and then going from there. Also, our rosemary is going to go in there too. So we're going to let that sit about a minute and a half. Now with these, we're going to not touch them. Like, we're not even going to look at these for another minute and a half. Okay, those are just going to sit and do their thing.
And from the chat, Susan says that Giada would be very proud of your Italian accent when pronouncing pancetta.
Oh, pancetta, yes, pancetta. All right, so you can see that our onions have cooked down. Our tomatoes are still nice and firm. And to this, we're going to add in our corn. And we talked earlier about the tomatoes and cutting down to just the flesh. That way we don't have a lot of extra liquid. You can see how much liquid we have in this pan even doing that. So if we'd left the tomatoes whole and putting all that in there, it would be a ton of liquid. So now we're going to cook this down. And again, all that corn milk that we shaved out of the ears is going to help to thicken that up. We're going to get a little bit of salt and pepper in there too. We'll check our seasonings in a minute. All right, scallops look good. So the last thing we're going to do while we're getting ready is we're going to pull our pears out. And we'll use this. We haven't forgotten about our pears, so we're back to pears now. I know we're kind of jumping all over the place, but we are back to our pears now. So we're going to pull them out. They should be pretty well cool at this point. And we're going to return this poaching liquid back to the stove and cook it down until it's syrup. I'm going to pull these vanilla beans out, and we'll talk about those vanilla bean pods in just a second. But we're going to, again, so this is our liquid, and we're going to reduce this by about half until it's a nice syrup. And your house probably smells like vanilla right now, and I hope it does because it smells like vanilla in here. All right, scallops. All right, we got a little bit of color, can go a little bit longer on them. And we'll give it just another couple minutes, or a couple of seconds rather. We're probably at about a minute. We probably need about 30 seconds, 45 seconds on those. All right, so vanilla beans. For anyone that hasn't worked with vanilla beans before, hopefully it's been a fun experience. And for those of you that have, you know how expensive they are. So you want to get the most mileage you can out of these vanilla beans. So what I like to do with them is I'll just take about a cup of sugar, and I'll dry off my vanilla bean nicely. Try to get some of that, some of that extra poaching liquid out of there. And then I'll just bury this vanilla bean in my sugar. In a couple of days, you'll have vanilla sugar. It's a really great way to get some extra mileage out of those vanilla bean pods because, again, they are very expensive, so you want to get as much as you can out of them. Some other options are to let them dry and grind them down with your coffee beans if you do your own coffee bean grinding at home. And something I learned recently is that some people will put them into Epsom salts and put them into their bathtub and have a vanilla bath. So that was kind of a fun thing I learned recently that people do. But I think vanilla sugar is a really great way to stretch that pod as far as you can. All right, scallops. All right, you can see we've got a nice little ring of crust around them. So that's the color we're looking for. That's exactly what we want. And you can see how much liquid is collected in that pan, even though we started off with very little of the butter and oil. Oh. Some of them are a little bit sticking, but it's fine. All right, we'll return that to the heat. And we are just about done. We are just about done, y'all. So the last thing we're going to do with our corn, after we toss it up a bit, is we're going to add a little bit of oil and a little bit of vinegar. Now, whatever vinegar you have is going to be fine for this. I have red vinegar today. You want to be kind of light with it. It's just enough to kind of cut all the butter and all the richness of everything else. Those pork chops are really rich. That farro is going to be nice and buttery. The scallops are going to be very rich. So we need a little acid complement to all that. So just a little acid. We'll do a double check on the seasonings. Make sure you're checking your seasonings. If you need to add a little more salt, a little more pepper, a little more vinegar, now's the time to do it. And you can see, again, what we talked about. See how that liquid that's in there? How that's almost like a sauce now. So that corn milk has done its job. It's thickened up all of our liquid into a nice, again, almost like a cream corn consistency.
And for those who don't trust themselves to flip the corn in the pan like that, they can just use a spoon, correct?
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. Yeah. So, might make a little bit of a mess, but that's the plate we're going on anyway, right? So we'll go ahead and start plating these. Told you we were almost done. And we also like to make sure we give you plenty of food, so you should have leftovers for tomorrow. It's a lot of food. All right, scallops, I'm turned off. We're just going to let those sit a second. Scallops are off. All right, we pull our farro. And we just threw those green onions in there just to give a textural difference. All right, so one person gets a pork chop, one person gets scallops. There's our pork chop and scallop dish. And then they both get a little of the gremolata on the side. And we're just going to throw this on the side. That way you can kind of add a little bit to each bite. So just a little bit right there. And then just a little right there. Just a little on the side. That way you can kind of pick up a little bit with your fork with each bite. Add as much or as little as you'd like to each bite. But I think this gremolata will really complement. Again, it's just bringing that acid and that fresh element to otherwise a very rich dish. All right, last thing we have is our pears. So you see we're about halfway there, but you can kind of let that go a little bit longer to whatever consistency you want, and then just pour the syrup over your pears when you're ready to go with your vanilla ice cream. It'll be ready to go, ready to serve. I don't have any vanilla ice cream, but I'm sure you do. I hope you do. You could use whipped cream if you prefer, but that's it. That's our class for the night. So we'll be around for another minute or two for any more questions anyone has. If anyone needs to catch up to where we are, this is the time. So thank you all for being here again. And Brittany.
And yes, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat. You all have been lovely company as I, with you, watch Chef Lawrence make this amazing meal. But I also have a bucket of names for our drawing for our fabulous prize package that includes a $50 gift card to Hall's Chop House. Let's see who our winner will be. Samson Morocco is the winner of our drawing. So congratulations. I hope you enjoy this meal and whatever meal you get at Hall's. And thanks everyone for joining us for this virtual cooking class and for supporting Harvest Hope Food Bank and helping those in our community who are in need.